I would like to welcome the audience of the Media Center Ukraine Odesa. You can watch us both on YouTube channel and on the Facebook page. And also, you can ask your question during the broadcast. Just scan the QR code that you can now see on your screen. Our current speaker is Andriy Savchenko, military expert. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Let's look back at our counteroffensive just 6 months before the beginning of the counteroffensive, of the probable beginning of the counteroffensive. There were a lot of discussions, a lot of information, including different fakes, and now we can see that there were certain forecasts, plans, and expectations, but we have what we have. You, as a military expert, what are the main miscalculations for the counteroffense? I can say that all those discussions of the plans, of our expectations from politicians should not be discussed because that were just political talks. When it comes to the counteroffensive that was planned for the year, it was planned last winter. It was planned by two teams. The General Operator Office of the General Staff of Ukraine and the second team that were representatives of the armed forces of our allies. Two teams developed the plan for counteroffensive that was supposed to be implemented by General Zaluzhny. And Zaluzhny has turned to be in a very difficult situation because he approved the plan and he was aware of the plan. What is not rational in the plan? This is the creation of the offensive group that was created from brigades that were separate brigades. Around 12, 18 brigades were planned for the counteroffensive. And the fact that the brigade were chosen for counteroffensive shows that international partners were involved in the preparation of the plan, basing on their own theory of military activity, basing on brigades. And this can be used for such countries as Iraq or Afghanistan. So, where they had the American troops and the NATO troops had more equipment and manpower. They were dominant. But for us, we should come back to those military doctrine that we used to have and the one which is used now by the Russian Federation. For the counteroffensive operation, we should have formed the General Army. We had enough sources for that. Back in spring, we have received all weapons and ammunitions for that counteroffensive, and also our personnel was trained in the training centers of our allies. By that time, the decision on counteroffensive should have made. The second thing that I can see as a result of my analysis is that there should have been some operative and tactical tasks. One of the operative strategic tasks was to take control over the Kakhovka HPP for the Russian Federation not to explode the dam. And we should have done it in March when we had enough people and resources. For that, the Special Operative and Tactical Unit was supposed to be prepared on the basis of the naval brigades. And they should have made the special units to preserve the Kakhovska HPP plan. And we could use that naval division for land and air operations to support the combined army that I believe should have been prepared. The second, one more factor that has changed the counteroffensive, that was the decision of Zelensky, was liberation of Bakhmut. That decision was supported by General Syrsky and Tarnavsky, and to implement that task, Tarnavsky was appointed, and he received 30% of the counter-offensive group, depriving the general group and the commander-in-chief, who usually have that 30% as reserve. This was personal strategic reserve. In that situation, General Zaluzhny decided to continue the counteroffensive, but he had to change everything on the go. And so we can see the current situation, and I can analyze it. We can see that the main combat activity is near Robotyno. And this is the most prepared when it comes to engineering, artillery, and aircraft. This is what was done by the Russian army during last winter and this year. And now the counter-offensive is at the most prepared place on the side of the Russian Federation. And I have a question to the professionalism of those who recommend Zaluzhny to perform counteroffensive at the most prepared part. And everyone knows, even during the training, that the attack should be made on the weakest point. Why is it happening like that? I understand General Zaluzhny, I understand how decisions are made. And I can say that those officers or generals that made their proposals are at the tactical level. And we can see now that those officers and generators are heads of brigades at the maximum, because we don't have divisions, armies, military districts. We have operational commands and brigades in the structure of our army. This means that the officers are not well prepared to deal with strategic and operative management tasks. You, as the military expert, what can you offer? Not only the criticism, but some rational proposals. I can say at once what I've tried to inform the Minister of Defense, General Zaluzhny, about. At the moment, General Zaluzhny should look back a bit to see that we, the retired officers and generals who started at the Soviet academies, are those people who are well aware of how the Russian Federation fights. Because we started with Russians in the academies, we served together. We know their mindset, what they are going to do, and how to fight them back. For this, General Zaluzhny should mobilize us for their main operative command, for us to make our proposals how to fight Russian Federation, because we are well aware of their activities, because they fight as we started and we were trained. How do you see the strategy for the military operations? Please understand me right. If I propose something, and we are watched by our enemy, by our adversary, and if I offer something good, they can equip them. And I would like to welcome those mayors from FSP. And the second question, the Soviet Union had no experience in such operations. There were no attacks with front lines divisions. There was no advancement on Europe. And that's why the plans of Russia failed in spring 2022. If you were trained together with Russian generals, where can you get a practical experience of such a mass-scale offensive? Because those generals who are now at the Ukrainian headquarters, they also started in the same academy, and after the start of the war, they had to change what they knew. When it comes to the time frame, in the 1990s, Ukraine became an independent state, and in 1991, 1992, we just continued training at the academies of the operative and strategic level. And those officers who continue training, they are those who did not serve now, because they are around 60-year-olds now. These are the last officers who used to study back then. And you say that the Soviet Union had no experience of how to fight with such big units. I can say in response that we cannot compare the war with exercises. But first of all, there was the specific system of training of the military. When it comes to operative and strategic academies, including the general staff, so they were fully trained for offensive. That was the decision of the department of those academy, and I can see these solutions now used by the Russian Federation. Now, we have knowledge, we have experience to organize and to prepare such operations, because those were exercises at the general staff level. They were the military games. So we had exercises at the level of regiments, armies, and brigades. We have such knowledge. But what we can see now that since 2020, and when we saw the emergence of brigades, and now the structure is the command of the land forces that have brigades, but there are no divisions, no armies, and no military districts. We have the operative command south. This is the commander that has his staff, but there are no soldiers to be trained. So these military, they don't have any theoretical background. They are practitioners who are the part of the war, and they can solve these issues that they can see in the real-time mode. Yes, this is really very interesting, and I can agree with what you're saying now. But what I've seen and what I've been told, all elements of the counteroffensive or offensive should be modified. For example, in the Soviet Union, they used to have drones, and I learned about that in 2015. But those drones could not be used in the modern conditions. So they have reconstructed them. They make this kamikaze like Tu-104. And recently, I've met the tank drivers in one of the area, and because of the huge amount of drones there, the tank has to go to the position for 2-3 minutes to fight over the horizon, and to use a self-propelled, and it's used as a self-propelled vehicle. And this is not what was taught in academia, and even now. As for infantry offensive, and that was the case for the Soviet Union, because they had a lot of people and there was no responsibility against the society. We can compare the situation to the United States, when the public opinion does not tolerate huge amounts of losses. And this is what actually Russia uses now. But that's why it is very difficult for me to imagine how these methods that could have been used during the Soviet Union can be applied now in the 21st century. And I fully agree with you that as the Surovikin and all this military campaign builds the protection lines, the front line means that they use the methods of the Soviet Union, including the trench, mines, supply, and now let's come to the operative decision. You started the question with the new types of weaponry and machinery. And new types of tools change the tactics at the contact line. However, when it comes about operative art is the finding solutions to operative tasks. This is the conquest of specific territories and the destroyal of the enemy. Operative art also has tactics. And now military stopped at the brigade level. And but for the counteroffensive operation, we should have created army corps. But soldiers and tank men will use the approach that you've mentioned. But when it comes to proper planning of the operation, we need to have experience of planning and the proper level of tactical knowledge, and also the experience of exercises for the proper understanding. Now we use mainly Western ammunition that supplied abroad. I'm not sure about 100% efficiency of the Soviet production, but I don't think that they would have never expected to receive projectiles from other countries. That's why when it comes to supply of army corps, armies, front lines, that could have been efficient, and it is efficient in Russia. But unfortunately, actually at the moment, hopefully we don't have such a situation. But now we try to keep a balance. There is a regular supply, as has been mentioned by Zaluzhny in the interview for The Economist. And secondly, there is the lack of manpower. And this is the second thing that could have been a problem for the Soviet Union, because that was a totalitarian regime there. I can agree with you with all these issues. And the first thing I'd like to say is that when it comes to supply of the armed forces of Ukraine, it is organized from the top. It should be from the central level, from the services of the general staff. So from the general staff and then down. And there is only one structure dealing with the supply of this brigade. And this is the service dealing with the rear of all the forces. And now coming back to my proposal to expand these military structures to the army corps, to armies, this is needed because in this case they will have their own staffs and their own supply services who will cover their own area responsibility. And when it comes to the General Army, we had enough resources that were provided by the West, such tanks as Leopard, Challengers, APCs, etc. And if we had that combined army, we could use that machinery, and we could have supplied ammunition for that army. We received a lot of T-72 tanks by the countries of the former social camp, and we could easily use the tanks because we had the maintenance and ammunition for that tanks. So, but the whole system should have been created. And why don't they create this system? Because no one knows what is the army, how it should be used, what is the army kit. But this is not the topic for today. As for the Soviet Union, you're right in saying that the Soviet Union had a huge mobilization resource. And in Russia today, the mobilization resource is up to 20 million conscripts. Those who are retired, those who have military experience. And if we compare this to Ukraine, this is the half of the population of Ukraine. And it is really a very difficult task. And Russia can make legally or illegally all this contingent to join the armed forces of the Russian Federation, so they could be delivered to the military commissariats, they could be further trained, and then could be made to fight in Ukraine. FSPs in cooperation of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, and they are capable of that. We also see that the Russia wants to get rid of the prisoners by sending them to the front line. So these are not trained people, but they can still kill our soldiers. Today, on the front line, we should also look at where professionals are sent. When it comes to the professional landing troops, this means that the enemy wants to achieve some results. When we see that they use prisoners, then they just try to distract our attention. So we should analyze all these things. What can we do? And from our side, we don't have so many people to be mobilized, and but the West can supply state-of-art modern weapons that can kill more enemies than the weapon that could be used by the enemy. We have such weapons now, and we can see the results when we can use only one projectile to destroy a tank or some artillery. And to respond, they need to use the whole train of ammo of the old type. But Russia now learns from us how to fight, and we should understand this. We can see new UAVs, we can see the amount of UAVs that they use. This is what they have taken from us. The drones can be used to destroy the enemy in trenches. General Zaluzhny says now that there is a lack of ammo. But, when it comes to the war, both parties feel the lack of ammunition, equipment and personnel. But there are some objective indicators when it comes to the amount of ammunition, to the regularity of supply and armament. But we are in these conditions, and we should look for the optimum solutions to make more optimal and efficient decisions to achieve better results. Let's come to the next topic. And the winter is coming, and this is the time when the military operations are not that active, so we cannot expect the efficient counteroffensive from Ukraine and from attacks from an advancement from Russia. What is your forecast for the winter? I believe that both parties have achieved certain parity, because both parties feel the lack of resources for further advancement. When it comes to the Russian troops, the high military command of Russia, they has been fulfilling the task that they had last year. This is the increase of soldiers from 1 million, from 1.5 million people. This is the staff increase. These are not some separate mobilized groups or commands, but they turn brigades into divisions, and divisions are turned into army, corps or armies. And we can see that they expand this. The occupied territories are now saturated with the forces of the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation has such a principle for their military operations as implemented military into the occupied territories. They introduced the Russian Guard, the FSB, Chechen units, and formations, which are not the formations of the armed forces. So they bring everyone and everything that they have. How can you assess the level of their military training? We can see that the level of military training in the Russian Federation is as follows. The Latin troops, the Marine infantry, those who have been trained for 2-3 months, show one result. Those people who brought from the military, from prisons, they have a different level of training, and the losses is not the problem from the Russian command. Tasks are more important for them, and the losses don't matter, because behind they have 20 million people of mobilization resources. So the losses is not a problem for them. They will just mobilize more people, they will train them, and they will be the paratroopers, for example, because the school of paratroopers was one of the most developed in the Soviet Union compared to the rest of the world. And we should remember that all paratroopers were left in Odesa. We used to have the Volgograd paratrooper division in Volgograd, in the Odesa Oblast, and it was liquidated. We should remember the paratroopers battalion that was left in Hostomel in parts. Sorry for intervenence. They could have had those forces, but the best were sent first to Ukraine in February and in March, and not much has been left of them. And I fully agree, but we should not underestimate our enemy, and they really learned from us. But what about the training level for the newly mobilized? Is it enough? As for the Russian Guard, the Special Forces, Oman, they are really trained to deal with rallies. This is their specialization. But what about these military compounds? Are they trained enough for offensive and mountains near Avdiivka and Kupiansk? As for the losses, which are not the problem for them, I fully agree with you, but it is when it comes about people, but they cannot deal with the losses of equipment like tanks because they need to produce new ones to substitute them. I can start with the following. When I served in the armed forces of the Soviet Union, and first I was the commander of the unit and then the commander of regiment. And I worked with people on with all of my jobs. The best soldier in the Soviet Union army was a Ukrainian. And it's not because I'm a Ukrainian myself, but that was the truth. Belarus soldiers were rather experienced from the Baltic countries, yes, but it could never be said about the Russian soldier. What is the reason for that? If that was a soldier from some settlement or a village, he was a drunkard, but and they had no strive. The soldiers from Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan were more motivated and were better at training. But Russian soldiers, they just don't care. And perhaps can be said about the Russian army. Nowadays, you say that they used the best units, but actually that were not the best. That was something that they wanted to demonstrate, like tank divisions. They were just ostentatious, so this is a well-polished equipment on the training ground. And we also had ostentatious regiment and ordinary regiments. When it comes to ordinary regiments, where people had more experience, they were actually better at training, but when it comes to this ostentatious, they just had no experience. And they were sent to fight here as a showcase of the army. And here they faced Ukrainians, and Ukrainians never give up. And we fight here for our homeland, for our children and grandchildren. And we have the higher level of morale because we fight for our ground. And when they came to us, they first wanted to preserve their life or to flee. And we can see that near Kiev, Kharkiv, and that was also in the Kherson Oblast. And that was operation where they took their forces. And I can say, so there will be no victories over us. They will have only defeats, and the only problem is their quantity. So their quantity can make us withdraw from some territories to leave Avdiivka or Kupiansk, but this is only what we can think of. But we can see how our army fights back. But everything should be properly calculated. When it comes to Bakhmut, and Bakhmut was of interest for us when our forces were still there. And because for when our fallen hero, the enemy lost 10 soldiers. When our enemy entered in Bakhmut, and it was 50 by 50, and that correlation was 1-to-1. And we had to leave some forces there and take our people from there. But the different decision was made, and we can see that Bakhmut is still under control of the Russian Federation, and we fight on the left and on the right. Some other questions. Good afternoon. I'm a journalist from the Netherlands. Sorry for this unpleasant question. And now, they can say that in the United States, they say that it is difficult to find funds to support Ukraine. You say, can you say that you say that Russia cannot win and will continue fighting, but can you continue fighting without the support from the United States? We will be able to continue fighting, but how? We depend today on the supply of weapons, on the financial and other support from our international partners. The latest news was that Germany has decided to increase in 2 times the financial support of Ukraine the next year, and this will be a significant advantage. If we have some issues with the United States, as you've mentioned, of course, we are considering this issue. I think that in this case, Europe and the Great Britain will be able to compensate those for us. So, what is Ramstein? Ramstein is a place where the ministers of defense gather. They gather there to solve the issue how to support us further, and then define different states that can provide different support. Of course, that support will decrease now because in spring they have provided to us the surplus and excess of their equipment, and now they need to produce new one. So we need to replan our military operations. Last year, such people as Budanov said that we could reach Crimea, but such people do not understand how the war is going on. We will continue fighting in any case, but we should not focus only on the quantity and quality, but we should also look for the new options for the military operations to win. And one more question. In our newspaper, and there was information that the former head of the NATO stands for the quick accession of Ukraine into NATO, but without the occupied territories. What do you think about this? I cannot agree with him. As a Ukrainian, I believe that we need to liberate our territories. And there is an offer, proposal. This person has analyzed something, but he doesn't know us, Ukrainians. We cannot leave or give up our territories. To give up our territories and to become NATO members. But what we should do next, then this means that NATO will fight with Russia. But NATO doesn't want to fight with Russia. And if NATO doesn't want to fight with Russia, there is only one possibility or alternative, is to provide modern weaponry to us, for us to have victory. But I think that they believe that Russia doesn't want to fight with NATO, and that the umbrella of NATO could protect the rest of Ukraine. The Russia-NATO issue is the same as the Soviet Union, and that the water agreement. This is two geopolitical enemies. For Russia, NATO is always the enemy. And the United States. That was like it was with the Soviet Union in the Warsaw Pact. And the same is for the United States. United States also has the only enemy, Russia. But what about China? China is another story, because the war is here now in Ukraine. And today the interests of the United States and the interests of NATO are protected by us, Ukrainians. And the fact that we cannot give support and equipment on time means that there is a problem with NATO, because they are not the shop that can provide everything that we need. They need to produce, they need to repair, they need to supply. And that's why this year we have the results that we have, but there are some miscalculations. But these are miscalculations at the strategic and planning level. But when it comes to our battalions, brigades, when it comes to soldiers of the front line, Ukrainians have already proved that Russia cannot conquer us. Thank you. We will stop here. Thank you very much for joining us today. That was Mr. Savchenko, military expert. We'll continue at 1:30.